Hello, and welcome to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Let's unpack the relationships that we encounter in our daily lives and learn about what makes them tick. And now your host for Red Rock Relationships, Dr. James B. Stein.
Yeah, let's do some of that unpacking indeed. I'm getting right back into the swing of being on this podcast. I was a little bit nervous that with all the new fun stuff in my life that this would become a burden, but it's very much stayed something that I'm looking forward to doing on most Fridays. We are continuing our conversation on relational maintenance. We are gradually getting more and more specific, more and more micro, and to help me do that specifically, to help me talk about the role in social media, the role that social media plays in relationship development and maintenance, I'm really excited to welcome for the very first time to the program, Dr. Anisa Rohadiat. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Of course, and it's been quite some time since we've chatted about communication. I think the last time we physically crossed paths was, what was that, ICA 2017 in San Diego?
Yes, it has been a while, hasn't it?
Funny how that I had just gotten my first dog, and now I have a second dog. That's how that's how I measure time in dogs.
Well, Jeter, right? I think that was the first dog.
Yeah, there's Jeter, and now there's Goose.
Goose. Oh wow, that's nice.
Yeah. So they're good boys, and they're all over my social media accounts, which is of course what we're going to be talking about today. But of course, I think we're going to be talking a little bit more about the human element of social media. So, since this is your first time on the show, I'm hoping you can just give us a really brief introduction, who you are, what your academic lineage is, and what you're currently studying.
Okay, thank you. All right, my name is Anisa. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Communication Studies at California State University Stanislaus. It's in Central Valley, California. And my research interest is actually at the intersection of communication technology, identity, and culture. And I have an ethnographic focus on a particular population, mainly individuals who identify as belonging to the Islamic faith or Muslim users of social media who reside in North America. I'm also interested in how people use technology in close relationships in general. And I was actually introduced to online dating research after taking a course by the incredible Dr. Stephanie Tong. And then I got roped into the Tong research team, right? So Dr. Tong is my graduate advisor and mentor. She still mentors me. And shout out to Smart Labs and the Tong research team at Wayne State University's communication department. So I'm very excited to be here and grateful for the opportunity to just share some stuff that I enjoy learning about, exploring with everyone today.
Heck yeah. And of course, you are a guest on the show at the recommendation of Dr. Tong. I don't know if you knew that. I reached out to her to ask her if she wanted to do a different episode, and she was like, by the way. So, and we've had other Tong students on here. Soon to be Dr. Rob Matheny has made an appearance on here as well. So it's all ASU and Wayne State on this show. That's just trying to get away from it, but we just can't do it.
Go Warriors.
Yeah, well, What do we say? Fork 'em. Anyway, let's get to the topic at hand. Social media has become an abundantly important element of relationship development, maintenance, and in some cases, disillusion. In earlier episodes of this podcast, we've talked about Tinder and Bumble and kind of ways to help present yourself, but it was a much more tertiary, a much more broad, sweeping discussion of it. So I want to get a little bit more specific in this episode, and I want to start by just gauging, in your opinion, I want to hear, what do you think are the most important or the most influential social media applications when it comes to something like relational development or relational maintenance?
Ooh, okay, that's a great question. Well, I'd approach this by first looking at what or how folks use communication technology more broadly, including social media and social network sites. So broadly speaking, most of our social media use pertains to maintaining existing relationships, right? So, and that includes not just strong ties, but also weak ties. And in that respect, studies have demonstrated that Facebook is one of the more popular platforms for relational maintenance of existing ties. But then we could also look at it from a platform feature and affordances perspective. And affordances here meaning action potentials or action capabilities. And so overall, the social media platforms allow us greater flexibility in communicating with one another directly, and certain affordances like asynchronicity, for example, is proven to facilitate communication among folks who are geographically apart and in different time zones. So think of folks who are in military deployment abroad, and how they communicate with their family members. Another example would be romantic couples who are in long distance relationships. So there's something to be said there too. And since most of our social media use utilizes mobile devices like smartphones, the affordance of mobility, portability offers yet another layer of flexibility, right, in terms of channel and also temporal flexibility too. So moving on to actual platforms and built-in features, each platform provides channel flexibility, right? So think of Facebook. You have the more dyadic way of communicating through instant messaging, and then you have a more public way of communicating, right? Or mass personal, as some folks call it. And this includes commenting, public comments, right? Commenting on people's posts, wall posts, and so forth. And so folks have used, like within one platform, you can use various channels. So going back to your question about like what kind of social media apps are most important, well, I think a better approach would be to actually look at just the idea of social media in general from, like a more platform and affordances perspective, because that would allow us, kind of like more detailed insights.
Oh, no,
into, like, how people are
you're
using.
telling me it depends?
It depends.
Oh,
yes.
no,
That's
it's
gonna be a theme,
the,
actually, James. That's gonna be a theme
that,
in
yeah,
this.
it's almost like it depends is like the mantra of every single communication professor I've ever met. That's crazy. Okay, I will let you get away with that one because I do agree it's definitely relationship specific. I would also argue, and this is totally speculative, I would argue it's also generation specific. I think that certain generations are more prone toward things like, when I think about like millennials, like we love Instagram and Snapchat. When I think about Gen Z, they are TikTok gang, and then Gen X and Boomer are a little bit more Facebook heavy.
That's true.
So it depends. I'm okay with that. I am okay with that. Let's talk about some of those like specific actions that you were discussing briefly there. What are some of the ways in which people make use of their various media channels to construct relationships, or like if there's an existing relationship, how do they maintain it? Or if they have to, how do they push people away using social media?
Okay. Yeah. So I think social media, one of the characteristics or like one of the advantages of using social media is that it facilitates relational maintenance of larger networks, right? So it's there, it's visible, and also it facilitates the exchange of relational maintenance messages, like supportive messages, like those birthday greetings and whatnot, right? So there's that. I think the main element that's interesting about social media is the extractive aspect, like in terms of information that is available. So in the initiation stage, for example, when, high uncertainty, things are unpredictable, we don't really know, the other person. What social media provides is actually extractive information. So we get to find out about our romantic potentials or like potential friends through their social media activity, right? And we can do so with little investment in a way, right? Because like it's there. You just need to kind of maybe look up their username. But then once you're there, or once you exchange usernames, then you are able to access all these information about the individual. So And that would allow you to also find out whether or not you have some commonalities, right? Interests that you share and so forth. And if there's chemistry there, then usually is followed up by relational development.
So stalking, Facebook stalking, good old-fashioned Facebook stalking. What the uncertainty scholars would call passive information seeking.
Yes.
I like it. Yeah. But what about the relationships that we've already got? What unique features does social media offer us in terms of developing or maintaining those relationships?
So I guess when it comes to like coming together, especially the experimenting stage, if we follow the stage model, right, of relational development, social media can be helpful for gaining social network support, I guess, and in that sense, and just other aspects of the development process. An example of this may be like going Facebook official or Insta official, and tie signaling, right? So that's an aspect too. When you are engaging in a mediated form of nonverbal signaling to folks that, hey, you're in an exclusive relationship, or you're hanging out with certain individuals more frequently than others, and so forth. But extractive information, going back to that topic too, that is helpful as well for relational maintenance, in the sense that it creates this, or it facilitates the ambient awareness. Like there's this concept about ambient awareness, where it's really just an awareness of the other person, and this is met through repeated exposures to fragments of personal information, which we see on the news feed of Facebook or other social media platforms, right? So it allows that sense of like, hey, we're connected, social connection, I guess, in a way. So we, despite distance, despite maybe time zone differences and what have you, you still feel as if like you're a part of your social network's lives by looking at the updates, right? Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm picturing like a metaphorical puzzle, and it's like a lot about these folks, right? You've put together most of that puzzle, and then you're able to take like the pieces of their media presence and use that to fill in the gaps of that puzzle. I've never really thought about it like that. That's a really interesting way of categorizing relationships. That's nice. Yeah. Are you ready for the hard questions?
Oh, okay. Let's do this.
Okay, so let's talk about things from a more dyadic perspective, from like a couple standpoint. Let's say we're in a relationship. This is what I do with my students. I say, okay, it's magic powers time, and then I go, boom. We're all in a committed exclusive relationship, and just like that, my magic powers have created that situation. Let's say we are in a position where one partner wants to publicly advertise the relationship. So like you were saying, like one partner wants to go Facebook official, or they want to make a joint TikTok post, right? Displaying that they're in a relationship, and the other one doesn't. Where might that resistance be coming from, and how as a couple can we navigate that dialectical tension of like openness versus closeness?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Wow. Well, so one of the things that I learned, right, in studying people's social media behavior and just contact use in general, is that much of what happens in our offline world, if you will, actually translate pretty well into the online, right? So in this sense, when we're thinking about certain idiosyncrasies, individual differences like personality traits, tolerance towards uncertainty, let's see what else, attachment styles, right? Like, and even self-disclosure, or people's approach towards self-disclosure. I think that pretty much is also manifested in the online, or in this case, like in social media use, right? So I think among couples, then the struggles of just navigating these differences also pertains to something like privacy and going public, right? So I did some reading in terms of like dialectics, and I was like, okay, it seems as if that I think the source of resistance would be more from a contextual dialectic viewpoint, and again, this relates to the whole public versus private, right? Because and I'm sure you're more you're more aware of like this dialectic, but Yeah, so let's see. In terms of the tension of either keeping um, the social interaction within a relationship private versus advertising it to not advertising, but like
No, I love it.
just
That's the word I
publicizing,
have in my
right?
notes. Advertise. I like it.
um, it let's see that yeah it is seemingly oppositional, but then if you look at what Baxter have suggested in terms of like some strategies in navigating this dialectic, there are some ways, right? And I thought
Hmm.
of for example, integration, and maybe a sub area of integration where people can negotiate and try to maybe even reframe the seemingly oppositional,
Mm.
polars here between being private and public into something else. Let's say people can talk about how, well, the thing about social support from your social network, right? Like that is a pivotal, um, I guess, what is it called? Not dynamic, but it's something that could facilitate relational development, right? Being,
Hmm.
like having your friends um, be in support of your relationship, and so maybe the discussion could be framed along, like, hey, this is one way of just getting folks to know about the fact that we're going exclusive without having to do anything else, right? It's pretty
Okay.
simple. You can use, yeah, in that sense, you can use, a particular platform. And that
Hmm.
brings me to the next point. So in terms of negotiation, there's so many ways of going public or going Facebook official, right? So you have, definitely you can change your relational status, but then folks may notice too, like the images that you post include new significant others, right?
Hmm.
And so that needs to be discussed as well, like whether or not your partner is okay with that. And maybe there are certain aspects, right, certain things that may not be posted, and that's again something that you need to coordinate with, and just discuss it through. So the platform as well, like, what kind, which platform, the privacy settings, right? Because like you can set that as well when you post about, when you just make a social media post, right? You can
Yeah.
adjust that. So yeah, so I think those are some of the things that came to mind when it comes to like, okay, how do we navigate that, and
Hmm.
what could be the source of that tension?
That's
Yeah.
interesting. So I'm hearing from you. It's like there are explicit ways in which you can advertise your relationship, like going Facebook official or like making a formal announcement, like guess who's in a relationship, which is very cringy and also all over TikTok, like people doing that for the cringe. Um,
Right.
and then you can do more implicit things, like what when you were just saying that last bit about controlling the privacy of your post. The first thing that I thought of was on like Snapchat and Instagram. You can make
Yes.
it so that only close friends see this, right? So it's like I'm going to
Right.
advertise my relationship in a story only to my
Mm.
close friends, see how they react to it, and then
Hmm.
maybe eventually you can work your way up toward a more
Hmm.
public presentation. That's a good strategy. And I
Hmm.
think that if there's one partner who's resistant to that, it's a good way to navigate that resistance, right? Starting small
Right.
instead of like opening up with like, a 75-foot 3-point jump shot. Maybe you start with a layup. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. But most importantly, like you do have to talk it through, right? Make it
absolutely.
a part of the relationship talk. It
Hmm.
might be awkward, but it's necessary because it is part of establishing boundaries and whatnot, right? So
Yeah, this is not an individual decision. That's part of being in a relationship, right? You need to make
yes.
couple decisions. Okay. On the other hand, breakups. Um,
Mm.
I believe it was the great William Shakespeare who asked to block or not to block. Um, what do we gain when we like exit a relationship? What do we gain by blocking our ex, and what, if anything, are we losing out on when we do that sort of damage control?
Ooh, yeah. Okay, so in terms of blocking or not blocking, I thought of this as, again, contextual, right? Now, if like from the point of view of, let's say, a woman in a relationship that is, maybe toxic,
Hmm.
or even abusive, then maybe blocking is the only way, right? Like that's the most effective way to get out of
Hmm.
a relationship. But that aside, what's interesting is that the research actually suggests, and this is primarily for college student populations, they found that 80% of college students remain friends on social media. So they're not blocking, they're not unfriending, right? So they remain friends. And I thought of this, and I'm wondering, like, why could that be the case? Well, it might be because of certain characteristics of social media, right? Certain advantages, in this case maintaining weak ties. And so maybe some folks are happy with the prospect of maybe down the line, reigniting old flames, or maybe just connecting, because you never know, right? Like you might be the job market, and then like in terms of like just
Yeah.
usual networking, concerns and whatnot. So that's that. And in terms of like, if you were to block that, if you were to engage in blocking, then you would remove yourself from that possibility, right?
It makes me think about, are
Yeah.
you familiar with back burner relationships? We've talked about it once or twice.
Ooh. Mm-hmm,
Like
mm-hmm.
those platonic relationships that like we
Yes.
keep because like, and like they're perfectly innocent on paper,
Yeah.
right? But we have in the
Right.
back of our mind, we're like, maybe. So
Right.
that's that's the first thing I think of. We need to do an episode on back burners. Maybe I have one opening left, so maybe we'll do that.
Ooh, that would be interesting. Yeah, absolutely.
No, but I think you make a
Yeah.
really good point there, like about the those long-term benefits, those social benefits, and also the
Yeah.
benefit of like, well, I don't want people to think that I'm the crazy ex who blocked my partner.
Right.
But I do think that it's important to clarify that if you're in a relationship that features like abuse or toxicity, sometimes blocking is the right thing to do. And
Absolutely.
if you're being blocked, you might just want to, just respect, right, the boundaries that the other person has set, even though it might hurt.
Yeah. That and being ghosted, right?
Oof, yeah,
Because
that's
there's no
tough.
closure, but that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then I wanted to also mention, like in terms
Mhm.
of the research out there, it also suggests that women and sexual minorities are more likely to engage in blocking or unfriending behavior, and
Yeah.
so there's some dynamic going on there too.
I believe that. Yeah, there's probably
Yeah.
a lot of victimization that's going on, perhaps unintentional, right? That
Yeah.
like this idea of like pursuing and then continuing to pursue and then continuing to pursue, and it can be very off-putting. So
Yeah.
yeah, respecting the wishes is big. So again, it depends, but I'm hearing that overall there's not as much blocking as initially thought. 80% maintain friends. Now, of course, there are various channels. So I'm picturing a scenario where it's like maybe you've blocked my number, but you did not block me on Facebook. And so you're like, look, I don't want that intimate connection anymore, but I still kind of want to see what you're up to. Something like that. I like that. I like that.
Yeah, monitoring behavior, right? Because I
Right,
think
yes.
that's part of coping.
Right
for
back
some
to
folks.
Facebook stalking. Right back to it. Okay. We have a little bit of time left, which means that we have
Sure.
time for the bonus question that I wanted to include. So,
Mhm.
in your academic and expert opinion, what's the best dating app and why?
Okay. So again, this depends on the dating pool, right? Like what dating pool you're a part of, I guess, if you're a part of a thin market. So demographics, all the individual differences, factors come to play as well. It really depends. And also it depends on your relational goals, because you might be looking into casual relationships, right? Like, or maybe you're open to, you might start off as looking for a casual relationship, and then you're open to long-term relationships. I don't know, but like it all depends, right? But the big dating apps out there, like Bumble, for example, is pretty popular among women for certain features, right? Like certain platform features, I think. And then OkCupid, you have the usual. But what interests me most is actually platforms that are not designated as a dating app, but people are using the platform or appropriating it for dating purposes. Like, I don't know if you're aware of social audio. There's a platform called Clubhouse.
Oh,
That's where-
yes. Oh, my God.
Yeah,
The things I've heard
that's
about
where things
Clubhouse.
are at. Yeah.
I need to hop on it.
So it's interesting. Yeah, people are setting up rooms called like shoot your shot rooms, and then I guess it's a way to kind of to reduce uncertainty by hearing what the potentials have to say on certain issues, right? And it's not as apparent as a dating app or a dating website.
That is interesting. Dating appropriation. I like it. I don't, but I do. Well, all right. That's actually going to end our time. Thank you so much, Anissa. It was awesome to talk to you about all this awesome stuff.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really, it was nice.
Good. I'm glad. And of course, in the vein of what we were just discussing in terms of the ability to manage things, next week we'll have Dr. Sami Shabib back on to talk about secret keeping and boundaries. So until then, I wish everybody a really happy, healthy week. Stay tuned and keep those relationships healthy.
You've been listening to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time. If you'd like to be on the show or have questions for us, please send us an email to redrockrelationships@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search Red Rock Relationships. Thank you again. And remember, it all begins with good communication. This has been a production from A Podcast Studio.